This article called Trauma Protection and Distress in Late Adolescence, a multi-determined approach, was authored by Beth Spencer Rosenthal, W. Cody Wilson, and Valeria A. Foch. This article published in Adolescence on winter 2009. This subject already has been implied in the literature. For example, Summerf and Seifer discuss accumulation of environmental risk. However, all the ideas have not been implemented and there have been almost no empirical study in this subject. This empirical study investigated the multivariable relationship between psychological distress and the combination of a set of 4 trauma events and a set of 4 protective factors. The hypothesis was combination of exposure to several traumatic events, and they account for a substantial amount of the variance in the manifestation of psychological distress symptoms among late adolescents. All the data for this research was collected at the same time. The sample compared 1,066 older adolescents aged 18. This was graduation senior in 4 different high schools in one large USA city. The homogeneity in age and type of community will increase the internal validate of the study, and the diversity of sample in terms of other demographic variables like gender, household income, and race will increase the external validate. All measurement was based on self-report. The dependent variable psychological distress was measured by an adaptive scale comparing 25 items. Experience with trauma deals with 4 common experiences among adolescents. 1. Being a victim of violence. 2. Witness of a violence. 3. Interpersonal loss. 4. Victim of accidents. The victim of violence scale contains 7 items and the witness of violence scale contained 11 items. Interpersonal loss scale was adapted from the negative life event scale. Spirit and accident was measured by a single self-report item. The study includes 4 protective factors that have been identified in the literature. 1. Emotional social support that was measured by a 6-item additive scale. 2. A sense of personal efficacy that was measured by 7-item additive. 3. Easygoing temper that was measured by a 2-item additive scale. 4. Gender that was self-report with a single item. All 8 of independent variables were statistically significant correlated with psychological distress. Although there was some intercorrelation among the 8 variables, 7 of the 8 remained statistically significant correlated with distress after the effect of the other variables were portrayed out. The zero-order correlation between the individual trauma variable and distress was similar to trauma distress correlate report in the literature. The 4 trauma variables were positively related to distress. The 4 protective factors were negatively related. The effect of the set of protective factors was more or less 2.5 times the effect of the set of trauma variables. The hypothesis guiding the study was confirmed. The finding contrasts with the typical finding report in the study of single trauma that trauma has a small to medium effect size relationship with distress. The results validate that contention that psychological distress in adolescents is a multi-determined phenomenon and that research in this area should move to use multivariable rather than single variable design. The research brings into sharp focus the necessity of taking into consideration multiple types of trauma experience when trying to understand the occurrence of psychological distress in adolescents. The research has 3 limitations that must be considered in interpreting the findings. First, it used a convenient purposive sample rather than a probability sample. Second, it considered a somewhat restricted set of both potential traumatic events and of protective factors. And third, it used a correlation rather than experience research design. The lack of probability sample limits the strict generalizing of the result of specific defined population. Although the present study had a multi-determinant rather than a single determinant orientation and examined the effect of a multi-type of trauma and multi-protective factor on psychological distress, it used only 4 trauma variables and 4 protective factors. Most of the research may well have been different with different sets of trauma and protective variables, and with large sets of these variables. Certainly, one must keep in mind that the research used correlation rather than an experimental design, and that the relationship found in the research are correlation between variables, not cause and effect relationship. Nevertheless, in spite of this limitation, the finding of the research might stimulate new thinking about interventions to prevent or ameliorate psychological distress.